Emma loved rainy days. To her, rain made the world feel softer, quieter. The smell of wet pavement, the rhythmic sound of raindrops, and the grey sky always brought her comfort. On days like this, she enjoyed sitting in a cafe, watching the city slow down. The rain felt like a pause, a moment to breathe. That morning, she left home without checking the weather forecast. The sky was cloudy but peaceful, with no sign of an approaching storm. She wore a light jacket, grabbed her bag and went out. On her way, she stopped at a bookstore, flipping through pages of novels and poetry. When she stepped outside, she felt the first cold drop on her cheek. Within minutes, the rain became heavy. People rushed under awnings and inside shops, trying to avoid getting wet. Emma looked around, unsure of where to go. Across the street, a small cafe caught her eye. The lights inside looked warm and inviting. Without thinking twice, she hurried across, dodging puddles, and stepped inside. The scent of fresh coffee filled the air. The cafe was cozy, with wooden tables, soft lighting, and quiet chatter. She walked up to the counter and ordered a cappuccino. As she waited, she glanced around. The place was full. Only one small table by the window remained empty. She took it, sighing as she sat down. Emma wrapped her hands around the warm cup, watching the rain hit the window. Drops slid down in thin, uneven lines, blurring the city outside. She liked this view, the world outside moving fast while she stayed still. She took a sip of her cappuccino, enjoying the heat. The cafe door swung open. A gust of cold air followed as a man rushed inside, his jacket dripping wet. He held a useless umbrella, struggling to fold it. His dark hair was soaked, drops running down his face. He sighed, clearly frustrated, and looked around for a seat. Emma watched him for a moment, amused. He walked to the counter and ordered a coffee. While waiting, he grabbed a napkin and tried to dry his hair. But it didn't help much. He let out a short laugh, shaking his head at his own bad luck. Emma smiled slightly, looking back at her cup. It was funny how rain could completely change someone's day. When he turned around with his coffee, he scanned the room. No empty seats. His eyes landed on Emma's table. For a brief second, their eyes met. She quickly looked away, but she already knew what was coming next. He hesitated, then walked toward her table. "Hey, sorry to bother you," he said, holding his cup carefully. "Would you mind if I sit here? The place is full." His voice was steady but had a polite, almost shy tone. Emma looked up and met his gaze. "Sure," she said with a small smile. He pulled out the chair, placed his coffee down, and took off his wet jacket, hanging it over the back. "Thanks. I wasn't expecting this much rain," he said, running a hand through his damp hair. Emma nodded. "Me neither. I left my umbrella at home." He chuckled, shaking his head. "So we both made poor choices today." Emma laughed lightly, the tension fading. She took another sip of her coffee as he did the same. There was a quiet moment between them, but it didn't feel awkward. The storm outside roared, filling the silence between them. Emma glanced at the window again. The glass now completely fogged. The cafe felt smaller, warmer. When she looked back, he was watching the rain too, lost in thought. Alex took another sip of his coffee, wrapping his hands around the cup for warmth. He looked at Emma and asked, "Do you like the rain?" His question was simple, but it felt honest. Emma thought for a second, then smiled. "Yes, I think the city looks better when it rains." Alex tilted his head slightly. "Really? I never thought about it that way. I usually just try to avoid getting wet." He glanced at his soaked clothes and let out a small laugh. Emma smiled. "Well, today wasn't your lucky day then." They both laughed, and the conversation started to feel lighter. Emma liked the way Alex spoke calm, casual, not in a rush. There was something natural about it. He wasn't trying to impress her, and that made her feel at ease. She stirred her coffee slowly. So, if you don't like rain, why didn't you wait somewhere else? Alex smiled, leaning back in his chair. Maybe I ended up in the right place without realizing it. Emma held his gaze for a second, her fingers tightening around the cup. Outside, the rain kept falling, the streetlights reflecting on the wet pavement. The cafe was still full, people chatting over warm drinks, but Emma and Alex felt as if they were in their own quiet space. She crossed her arms and looked at him. So, you came here by accident? Alex nodded. Yeah, I was walking to a meeting when the rain started. I thought it would stop, but then it got worse. He smirked, taking another sip of coffee. And now, I'm stuck here, with no idea when I'll be able to leave. Emma took a slow sip of her cappuccino. Same here. I was just running errands when it started pouring. She looked out at the foggy window. And now I have no umbrella. Alex leaned back slightly. So, we're in the same situation. She chuckled. Looks like it. They sat in a comfortable silence for a moment. Then Alex grabbed a napkin and started drawing random shapes with his fingertip. You know, he said, glancing up. There's one good thing about this. Emma raised an eyebrow. What's that? He smiled. If it hadn't rained, I wouldn't have found this table. Emma looked at him, her lips curving into a small smile. Alex looked at his coffee, then at Emma. So, what were you doing before the rain stopped your plans? He asked, tilting his head slightly. Emma smiled softly. I was at a bookstore, just looking at some novels. Alex raised an eyebrow. Oh, so you're a reader? Emma nodded. I like books. They're a good escape. She took another sip of her cappuccino before adding, And you? What were you up to? He sighed, leaning back in his chair. I was supposed to be at a meeting across town. But now, I guess I have a good excuse for being late. Emma chuckled. I doubt I got caught in the rain works as an excuse these days. Alex grinned. Maybe not, but it's true. He tapped his fingers on the table, hesitating for a second before speaking again. Since we're both stuck here, how about I ask you something? Emma glanced at him curiously. Go ahead, Alex smiled. Tell me something interesting about yourself. Something most people don't know. Emma raised an eyebrow, thinking for a moment. That's a tough question. She leaned forward slightly, tapping her fingers against her cup. Okay. I once got lost in a museum for 2 hours because I took a wrong turn. Alex laughed. Seriously? How does that even happen? Emma shrugged, laughing too. I don't know. I was following the signs, but somehow, I ended up in the staff-only area. It was embarrassing. Alex shook his head, still grinning. That's impressive. You might be the first person I've met who got lost indoors. Emma smirked. Your turn. Tell me something about you. Alex thought for a moment. All right. I once pretended to be someone else at a wedding because I accidentally sat at the wrong table. Emma's eyes widened. And did they believe you? Alex nodded, his smile widening. For a while, yes. They thought I was a distant cousin. I even got invited to give a toast. Emma laughed, shaking her head. That's both ridiculous and kind of impressive. He grinned. I like to think of it as quick thinking. Emma took another sip of her cappuccino, her eyes scanning his face. He was easy to talk to, natural, relaxed, and effortlessly funny. Outside, the rain continued, but neither of them seemed to notice anymore. The cafe, once just a place to escape the storm, now felt like its own little world. Emma twirled the spoon in her cup absent-mindedly. I think you're good at making the best of unexpected situations, Alex smirked. I try. Though I have to say, this might be the best unexpected situation I've found myself in. Emma felt warmth rise to her cheeks, but she simply smiled, looking back at her cup. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The cafe was filled with the quiet hum of conversation, the sound of cups clinking against saucers. Outside, the rain finally started to lighten, turning into a soft drizzle. Emma glanced at the window, watching drops slide slowly down the glass. She realized she didn't want the moment to end. Alex followed her gaze. Looks like the rain is stopping. Emma nodded, but she didn't reach for her bag or make a move to leave. Instead, she looked at Alex. So, if the rain stops completely, what's your plan? Alex hesitated, as if considering his options. Then he smiled. Well, I could leave. Or I could stay a little longer. He held her gaze, waiting for her reaction. Emma felt her heartbeat quicken slightly. It was a simple statement, but she understood what he meant. She had a choice. She could finish her coffee, say goodbye, and go back to her day. Or she could stay. She looked at her cup, now nearly empty. Her fingers traced the rim lightly before she glanced back at him. I guess that depends, she said, tilting her head. Do you like bookstores? Alex chuckled. I can't say I visit them often, but I'm willing to change that. Emma smiled, standing up and grabbing her bag. Then maybe you can make up for missing your meeting by finding a good book instead. Alex stood up too, slipping on his still damp jacket. All right, deal. As they stepped outside, the rain had stopped completely. The air smelled fresh, the sky still cloudy but peaceful. He looked at her. Lead the way. Emma walked ahead, and Alex followed. The city moved around them, but for a moment, it felt like they had their own little story unfolding, one that neither of them had planned. The streets were still damp, puddles reflecting the city lights. Emma and Alex walked side by side, their pace slow and unhurried. The world felt quieter after the rain, as if everything had softened. Emma pointed to a small bookstore on the corner. This place is nice. They have old books and a great reading section. Alex glanced at the sign above the door. So, this is where you get lost for 2 hours? She laughed, shaking her head. No, that was a museum. I promise I know my way around here. Alex grinned. All right. If I disappear inside, just know it's your responsibility to find me. They stepped inside, greeted by the familiar scent of paper and wood. The bookstore was warm and quiet, a sharp contrast to the cold, wet streets outside. Emma felt a sense of comfort, as if she were stepping into a favorite memory. Emma wandered toward a shelf filled with classic novels. She ran her fingers over the spines, her eyes scanning the titles. Alex stood beside her, pretending to be just as interested. So, what's the rule? Do I pick a book based on the title, the cover, or how heavy it is? Emma smiled. Definitely not by weight. But if you judge by the cover, you might be disappointed. She pulled out a book and handed it to him. Try this one. Alex looked at the title and flipped through the pages. This actually looks interesting. He glanced at her. Are you one of those people who smells books? Emma chuckled. Maybe, but only the really old ones. Alex smirked, closing the book. Good to know. I'll try not to judge. They moved through the aisles slowly, stopping every now and then to check different books. It wasn't rushed or forced. It just felt easy. Emma liked that. She wasn't used to meeting people who didn't feel like they had somewhere else to be. She found a small reading corner with a cushioned bench and sat down. Alex hesitated, then sat beside her, holding the book she had picked for him. Do people actually read in bookstores? He asked, glancing around. Of course, Emma said, crossing her legs. It's the best way to know if you really like a book. Alex raised an eyebrow. Or if you just want free reading time without buying it. Emma smirked. Maybe both. She leaned back, watching as Alex opened the book. The world outside felt distant now, the sound of passing cars barely noticeable. Alex turned a page, pretending to read. But his mind was elsewhere. He glanced at Emma, noticing how peaceful she looked. He hadn't expected to enjoy this, spending an afternoon in a bookstore with someone he'd just met. But somehow, it felt right. Emma looked up and met his gaze. Not a reader, huh? She teased. Alex laughed softly. I'm trying. He closed the book and tapped the cover. Okay, I'll buy it. Happy now? Emma smiled. That depends. Are you actually going to read it? Alex shrugged. Maybe. But if I don't, at least I'll have proof that I tried. She shook her head, amused. It was strange how quickly they had fallen into this comfortable rhythm. She wasn't sure if it was just the bookstore, or the rain earlier, or something else entirely. After Alex paid for the book, they stepped outside again. The sky was still cloudy, but the rain had stopped completely. The air smelled fresh, the streets quiet except for the occasional footsteps of passing strangers. They stood there for a moment, neither of them speaking. Finally, Alex looked at Emma. Well, I guess this is where we go our separate ways. Emma nodded slowly. I guess so. She wasn't sure what she was expecting, but she also wasn't ready for the day to end just yet. Alex smiled, holding up the book. Thanks for this. If I finish it, I'll let you know. Emma raised an eyebrow. And if you don't? He smirked. Then I guess I'll have to find another excuse to see you again.